My name is Margot Ellison, and I am 62 years old. I tell you this not because age defines me, but because it gives weight to what I'm about to share. At 62, I have learned that respect is not given. It is commanded. And when someone dares to disrespect you publicly, in front of people who matter, you don't just walk away. You make them remember why they should have kept their mouths shut. It was October 15th, a Saturday that should have been beautiful. The autumn leaves painted the venue in shades of amber and gold, the same colors I had specifically requested when I wrote the check for this wedding. Every single detail, from the hand-tied bouquets of white roses and eucalyptus to the crystal chandeliers hanging in the reception tent, bore my signature, my money, my approval. I sat in the third row, not the first where the mother of the groom traditionally sits, because Haley Danbury had made it very clear that I was an afterthought to this celebration. My son David's bride. The woman who was about to become part of my family whether I liked it or not. But let me be clear about something. I am not a woman who fades into the background. Even at 62, even with my silver gray hair swept into an elegant chignon and my grandmother's pearls at my throat, I commanded attention. I always have. The whispers that followed me as I took my seat weren't born of pity. They were born of recognition. Margot Ellison doesn't just attend events. She owns them. The ceremony was proceeding exactly as I had orchestrated it. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as the bridesmaids glided down the aisle in their dusty rose gowns. Then came Haley, 28 years old and glowing with the kind of beauty that believes it can conquer anything. Her dress, a custom Vera one that cost more than most people's cars, flowed behind her like liquid silk. My son David waited at the altar, 32 years old, and still believing that love conquers all. Still believing that his mother's concerns about his bride were born of jealousy rather than wisdom. Still believing that Haley Danbury loved him for more than his trust fund and his last name. I watched the ceremony with the same expression I wear during business negotiations, pleasant, attentive, and absolutely unreadable. But inside I was calculating. You see, I had been planning this moment for months. Not the wedding, the reckoning that was about to unfold. The reception began smoothly enough. Guests mingled on the terrace of the country club, sipping champagne that I had personally selected and paid for. The photographer captured moments of joy that would later become artifacts of shame. The band, a jazz quartet from New York that had cost me $15,000, played background music while people celebrated what they believed was love. I maintained my composure through the cocktail hour, through the dinner service, through the endless parade of toasts that praised the happy couple. But I was waiting. Patience, I have learned, is the most devastating weapon in a woman's arsenal. It was during the father-daughter dance that Haley approached my table. She had changed from her ceremony dress into a shorter reception dress, also paid for by me, and her cheeks were flushed with champagne and confidence. She leaned down, close enough that I could smell her perfume, Tom Ford Neroli Portofino, a fragrance I had given her as a gift months earlier. "Margot," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I need to ask you something." I looked up at her, my expression serene. "Of course, dear. What are you even doing here? You weren't invited yesterday." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around us, conversations died. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The string quartet continued playing, but the music seemed to fade into white noise. I have been insulted before. I have been underestimated, dismissed, and challenged. But never, never had someone questioned my right to exist in a space that I had literally paid to create. Never had someone been so foolish as to publicly humiliate Margot Ellison. I stood slowly, my movements deliberate and elegant. At 5'7" in my heels, I had to look down slightly to meet Haley's eyes. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice carrying the kind of cold precision that had made me millions in real estate. I should leave. Relief flickered across her face. She had one, or so she thought. But first, I continued, reaching into my clutch for my phone. I brought someone I think you should meet. A friend of yours. I sent a single text. Now. Who? Haley asked, but her voice had changed. There was uncertainty there now, a tremor that suggested she was finally beginning to understand that she had miscalculated. Someone who knows you very well, I said, my smile widening. Someone who's been missing you terribly. The terrace doors opened, and a man stepped through. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a tailored navy suit that I had helped him select. When Haley saw him, when she realized who was walking toward us with purpose and barely contained rage, she made a sound I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the sound of a woman watching her world crumble in real time. "Hello, Haley," said Jonathan Blackwood, the man she had been sleeping with for the past 6 months. The man she had promised to leave my son for. The man who had no idea he was about to become the instrument of my revenge. Haley's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her face draining of all color. "Jonathan, what are you? How did you?" "Surprise," I said quietly, stepping back to give them room for what was about to unfold. "I thought your wedding guests should meet your other boyfriend." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the band had stopped playing, and I smiled. Before I continue with what happened next, let me pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever been publicly humiliated, if you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever been dismissed simply because of your age or position, then you understand the fire that was burning in my chest that day. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. This channel exists because women like us, women who refuse to be silenced, dismissed, or forgotten, have stories that need to be heard. Stories that remind us that respect is earned, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that sometimes justice comes wrapped in silk and pearls. Subscribe now if you're ready to hear how a 62-year-old woman showed a 28-year-old girl what real power looks like. Hit that notification bell because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me take you back to the beginning, because revenge is never about a single moment. It's about patterns, about accumulated slights, about the slow building of pressure until something finally cracks. I became a widow at 50. My husband Thomas died in a car accident on a rainy Thursday morning, leaving me with a 30-year-old son, a portfolio of properties, and enough grief to drown in if I had chosen to let it. But I didn't choose that. I chose to build. For 12 years, I turned our modest real estate investments into an empire. I bought distressed properties, renovated them with an eye for luxury, and sold them to people who appreciated quality. I learned to read market trends like tea leaves and human nature like an open book. By the time I was 60, I was worth more than most people dream of, and I had earned every penny through intelligence, persistence, and an absolute refusal to accept less than I deserved. My son David grew up watching me rebuild our lives from the ashes of loss. He learned to appreciate strength, intelligence, and integrity because those were the values I modeled every day. So when he brought Haley Danbury home 18 months ago, I knew immediately that she was wrong for him. It wasn't her background. I'm not a snob about money because I remember what it was like to worry about mortgage payments. It wasn't her age. 8 years is nothing when both parties are adults. It was something else, something that set off every instinct I had developed over decades of reading people. Haley was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair that caught the light just right, blue eyes that seemed to hold promises, and the kind of figure that made men forget to think clearly. She was charming when she needed to be, sharp enough to hold a conversation, and smart enough to recognize opportunity when it knocked. But I saw through the performance. I saw how her eyes calculated the value of everything in my home during her first visit. I saw how she maneuvered herself into photographs at family gatherings, always positioned to look like she belonged. I saw how she asked innocent questions about David's trust fund, about my properties, about our family's financial planning. Most telling of all, I saw how she treated people she thought didn't matter. The housekeeper, whose name she never bothered to learn. The valet at restaurants who wasn't worth her attention. The elderly waiter at David's birthday dinner who moved too slowly for her taste. Character, I have learned, is revealed in how we treat people who can do nothing for us. Haley's character was as shallow as a puddle. But David was in love, and love makes smart men stupid. Every concern I raised was met with accusations of jealousy or interference. Every observation I shared was dismissed as a mother's inability to let go. So, I stopped voicing my concerns and started documenting them instead. I hired a private investigator 3 months after their engagement. James Morrison was discreet, thorough, and expensive, exactly the kind of professional I required. I didn't tell him to find dirt. I told him to find truth. Sometimes those are the same thing. The truth about Haley Danbury was ugly. She had been engaged before, to a man named Jonathan Blackwood, who owned a chain of boutique hotels. She broke that engagement when she met David, claiming that she needed space to grow and that their relationship had run its course. What she didn't tell Jonathan was that she had already moved in with my son. What she didn't tell David was that she was still sleeping with Jonathan. Morrison's report included photographs, credit card receipts, hotel records, and text messages. Haley was playing a game with 2 men, keeping both on the hook while she decided which offered better long-term prospects. The evidence was thorough, damaging, and absolutely legal to obtain. I read every page of that report twice, then locked it in my safe. I didn't confront Haley. I didn't tell David. I simply waited and planned. Because, you see, catching someone in betrayal is only half the battle. The other half is choosing the moment when that revelation will cause maximum damage. And what moment could be more perfect than her wedding day? The day when she stood in front of everyone who mattered and promised to forsake all others? I spent weeks cultivating Jonathan Blackwood. A casual meeting at a gallery opening that David couldn't attend. A sympathetic conversation about lost love and second chances. A gradual friendship built on the foundation of his wounded pride and my apparent understanding of his pain. I never lied to Jonathan. I never promised him anything beyond friendship. I simply listened, offered comfort, and occasionally mentioned what a shame it was that Haley had chosen security over passion. I planted seeds and let his resentment water them. The day before the wedding, I called Jonathan with news I claimed to have just discovered. Haley was getting married, I told him. She had never been honest with him about David. She had used him while building her future with another man. She's making the biggest mistake of her life, he said, his voice tight with anger. Perhaps someone should tell her that, I replied. And that's how Jonathan Blackwood came to be standing on the terrace at my son's wedding reception, ready to confront the woman who had betrayed him. He thought he was there to win her back or perhaps to stop a mistake. He had no idea he was there to be my weapon. The look on Haley's face when she saw him was worth every penny I had spent on this wedding. It was the look of someone realizing that their carefully constructed lies were about to collapse around them. It was the look of someone who had finally met their match in the game they thought they were winning. "Jonathan," she whispered, glancing around at the guests who were now openly staring. "You can't be here. This is your wedding," he said, his voice carrying across the terrace. "To another man. A man you were living with while you were telling me you loved me." The silence was beautiful. Even the servers had stopped moving. Every eye was fixed on the drama unfolding in real time. And I stood there, elegant and composed in my silk dress and pearls, watching the destruction of the woman who had dared to humiliate me. Let me tell you about Jonathan Blackwood, because understanding him is essential to understanding how perfectly this revenge unfolded. Jonathan was 35, successful, and devastatingly handsome in the way that made women forgive his flaws before they even knew what those flaws were. He owned 7 boutique hotels across the Northeast, each one more charming than the last. He had the kind of old money sophistication that comes from boarding schools and trust funds, but also the work ethic to build something meaningful with his advantages. More importantly, he had been genuinely in love with Haley. When I first approached him, and yes, I orchestrated that chance meeting at the Morrison Gallery, he was still raw from her betrayal. Not just the breakup, but the way she had done it. One day they were planning a spring wedding. The next she was returning his grandmother's ring with a speech about finding herself and needing space to grow. Men like Jonathan don't handle rejection well. They're accustomed to being chosen, to being the prize that women compete for. When Haley left him, she didn't just break his heart, she damaged his ego. And a damaged ego, properly manipulated, becomes a weapon of incredible precision. Our first conversation was at the gallery's wine reception. I was there legitimately, I serve on the board, but I had seen his name on the guest list and knew he would attend. Jonathan appreciated art, particularly contemporary pieces that reminded him of his sophistication. "That's a striking piece," I said, approaching him as he studied a painting by a local artist. It was abstract, all sharp angles and conflicting colors, rather like the situation I was about to create. He turned, and I saw the exact moment he recognized me. "Mrs. Ellison?" "Margot Ellison." "Please call me Margot. And you're Jonathan Blackwood. I've heard wonderful things about your hotels." What I didn't tell him was that I had heard wonderful things because I had researched every aspect of his life. I knew about his business, his family, his hobbies, and most importantly, his relationship with Haley. We talked for 20 minutes about art, business, and the challenges of maintaining quality in a world that increasingly valued speed over craftsmanship. Jonathan was intelligent, articulate, and clearly still wounded. "Perfect. I should mention," I said as our conversation was winding down, "my son David is getting married next month. Perhaps you know his fiancée, Haley Danbury." The change in his expression was immediate and profound. Pain flickered across his features, followed quickly by something harder. "I knew Haley," he said carefully. "We were close. I hadn't heard about her engagement." "Oh dear," I said, my voice filled with perfectly calibrated concern. "I hope I haven't said something I shouldn't have. I simply assumed, well, small world and all that." I let the moment hang between us, watching him process this information. Then, with the timing that had made me successful in every negotiation, I offered him exactly what he needed. "Perhaps we could have coffee sometime?" I find that in business, as in life, it's always valuable to have conversations with people who understand quality and integrity. He agreed, of course. Wounded pride rarely refuses an invitation to be soothed. Over the next several weeks, I became Jonathan's confidant. We met for coffee, for lunch, for gallery openings and charity events. I listened to his confusion about Haley's sudden departure. I offered sympathy for his bewilderment at her choice to end their relationship. I never criticized Haley directly. That would have been too obvious, too crude. Instead, I let Jonathan draw his own conclusions as I shared carefully selected observations about my future daughter-in-law. She's quite focused on security, I might mention. David's trust fund seems to give her great comfort. Or, I admire her ambition. She's very clear about wanting to position herself well in society. Or, most devastatingly, she seems to have a gift for telling people what they want to hear. Each comment was true. Each comment was delivered with apparent affection. And each comment planted seeds of doubt about Haley's motivations and character. 3 weeks before the wedding, I showed Jonathan the private investigator's report. Not all of it, just the parts that documented Haley's overlap between their relationships. The hotel receipts that showed she was still seeing him while living with David. The text messages where she professed love for both men simultaneously. "I thought you should know," I said gently. "I thought you deserved the truth about why she really left you." Jonathan's reaction was everything I had hoped for. Anger at being played, humiliation at being lied to, and something else. A desire for justice that I could work with. "She made a fool of me," he said, his voice quiet but dangerous. "Yes," I agreed. "She did. David has no idea what she's really like."
No.
"He doesn't. Someone should tell him." And there it was. The moment when my weapon became willing. I didn't suggest that he confront her at the wedding. I didn't have to. I simply mentioned casually that it was such a shame when good people were deceived. I wondered aloud whether David would want to know the truth if someone cared enough to tell him. Jonathan volunteered to be that someone. The plan we developed together was simple and devastating. He would attend the wedding as my guest. I told him I could arrange an invitation, though I didn't mention that I had paid for the entire event and could invite anyone I pleased. He would wait until the reception was well underway, until Haley was confident and comfortable, until the moment when her public humiliation would be most complete. Then he would present the evidence of her betrayal to everyone who mattered. Jonathan thought he was doing this for justice, for David's sake, to prevent a good man from making a terrible mistake. He had no idea that he was the instrument of my revenge against a woman who had dared to disrespect me. The beautiful thing about Jonathan was his righteousness. He genuinely believed he was doing the right thing, which gave him the moral authority to destroy Haley without looking like a jealous ex-lover. He was the hero of his own story, which made him the perfect villain in hers. Standing there on the terrace, watching Haley's face drain of color as she realized her past had arrived to claim her future, I felt the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the silent reception. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the crowd with the confidence of a man who believed he was saving everyone from deception. "I think there's something you all should know about the bride." The terrace fell silent in a way that only happens when people sense they are about to witness something extraordinary. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the children seemed to understand that they should stop their playing and pay attention. Jonathan stood in the center of it all, commanding the space with the kind of presence that successful men learn to project. He was immaculately dressed. I had helped him choose the navy suit and silver tie, and he carried himself with the righteous anger of someone who believed he was exposing injustice. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration," he continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the terrace. "But I believe you all deserve to know who you're really celebrating tonight." Haley had gone completely white. She grabbed David's arm, but he was staring at Jonathan with the confusion of a man trying to process an impossible situation. "Who the hell are you?" David demanded. "I'm Jonathan Blackwood," he replied, extending his hand as if this were a normal introduction at a normal event. "I'm Haley's fiancé. Or rather, I was until she decided she preferred your trust fund to my love." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. I watched faces as the words sank in, saw the moment when polite confusion transformed into scandalized attention. These were people who thrived on gossip, who lived for moments when their carefully ordered social world cracked open to reveal the chaos beneath. "That's not true," Haley said, but her voice was barely above a whisper. "David, he's lying. I don't know why he's here, but I have proof," Jonathan interrupted, reaching into his jacket for the folder I had prepared for him. Hotel receipts, text messages, photographs. Would you like me to share them with your guests? This is insane, David said, looking between his new wife and the man claiming to be her other fiancé. Haley, tell them this is crazy. Tell them you don't know him. But Haley couldn't speak. She stood frozen, caught between two worlds that were never supposed to intersect. The calculation in her eyes was visible as she tried to find a way out of this trap, but there was no escape route. Jonathan had testimony, evidence, and most importantly, the moral high ground. I positioned myself where I could see everything: Haley's panic, David's confusion, the guest's fascination, Jonathan's righteous fury. It was better than theater because it was real, because the consequences would follow these people home and into their futures. Show them, I said quietly, my voice carrying just far enough to reach Jonathan. Show them who she really is. He opened the folder with ceremony, like a lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. The first item was a photograph, Haley and Jonathan at dinner just 2 months ago, her hand on his, both of them looking intimate and happy. This was taken at Le Bernardin in February, Jonathan announced. 2 months after she moved in with you, David. 2 weeks after she returned my grandmother's ring and told me she needed space to find herself. He held up another photograph. This is from the Plaza Hotel in March. We spent the weekend there. She told me she was visiting friends. The murmur from the crowd was growing louder. People were craning their necks to see the evidence, pulling out their phones to record what was happening. This wasn't just scandal. This was social media gold. Stop. Haley finally found her voice. Please stop. This isn't, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Jonathan said. You were engaged to both of us simultaneously. You were planning 2 weddings, living 2 lives, telling 2 men that you loved them while deciding which one offered the better future. He reached into the folder again and pulled out printed text messages. Should I read these aloud? The ones where you told me you loved me while you were planning this wedding? The ones where you said David was just a phase, that you were coming back to me? Don't, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was beginning to understand that his perfect wedding day was becoming a nightmare, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jonathan ignored him. My personal favorite is from 3 weeks ago. Quote, Jonathan, I miss you so much. David is sweet, but he's not you. I just need to get through this wedding for my family, then we can be together the way we always planned. Unquote. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the servers had stopped moving. Every person on that terrace understood that they were witnessing the complete destruction of a marriage that was less than 6 hours old. Haley made a sound somewhere between a sob and a moan. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if David hadn't instinctively reached out to steady her. But even as he caught her, I could see the moment when his love began to transform into something else. Is it true? He asked her, his voice hollow. Were you seeing him while we were engaged? Haley looked up at him, mascara beginning to streak down her cheeks, and I saw her make the calculation that seals a person's fate. Instead of confessing, instead of apologizing, instead of throwing herself on his mercy, she chose to lie. It's not what it looks like, she said. He's obsessed with me. He's been stalking me. Those messages, I was just trying to let him down easy. It was exactly the wrong answer. Jonathan's face hardened with fresh anger, and David stepped away from her as if she had struck him. Stalking you? Jonathan's voice was dangerous now. Is that what you call it when you invited me to your hotel room last month? When you told me you loved me? When you said you were only marrying him for security, but your heart belonged to me? He turned to address the crowd directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing the wedding of a woman who is engaged to 2 men simultaneously, who has been maintaining intimate relationships with both of us right up until today, and who just accused me of stalking her rather than admit the truth. The crowd was beyond murmuring now. People were talking openly, pointing, recording everything with their phones. The scandal was spreading in real time, viral before it had even fully unfolded. And through it all, I stood perfectly composed in my silk dress and pearls, watching the destruction of the woman who had dared to humiliate me. This was better than anything I could have planned, because Jonathan's righteousness made him credible in a way that my own revenge never could have been. David looked at his bride, his wife of 6 hours, with the expression of a man seeing a stranger. "Is it true?" he asked again. "Any of it?" Haley's composure finally cracked completely. "David, please. Can we talk about this privately? These people don't need to." "These people paid to celebrate our wedding," he said, his voice gaining strength as his anger built. "These people deserve to know if they're celebrating a lie." "Answer him," Jonathan demanded. "Tell him the truth, Haley. Tell him about us." And finally, cornered and desperate, Haley Danbury told the truth. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I was seeing you both. But David, I chose you. I married you. That has to mean something." It meant everything. It meant the end of her marriage, the end of her reputation, and the beginning of consequences that would follow her for the rest of her life. The explosion of voices from the crowd was immediate. Guests talked over each other, sharing opinions and judgments and moral outrage. Phones captured every moment, every expression, every word. The story was already becoming legend. And I smiled. "I need to pause here because I want to talk to you about something important. What you just witnessed, the complete exposure of someone who thought she could manipulate her way to happiness, isn't just about revenge. It's about the power of truth and the importance of never allowing anyone to diminish your worth. Haley thought she could disrespect me because I was older, because I was just the mother-in-law, because she believed her youth and beauty made her untouchable. But power isn't about age or appearance. Power is about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone treat you as less than you are. If you're watching this and you've been made to feel invisible, irrelevant, or too old to matter, I want you to understand something. Your experience is your strength. Your wisdom is your weapon. And your time isn't over. It's just beginning. That's exactly what we talk about in our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. This isn't just about moving past hurt. It's about transforming that hurt into power, into purpose, into the kind of strength that makes people think twice before they try to diminish you again. The link is in the description below, and I promise you, these strategies will change how you see yourself and how the world sees you. But right now, let's get back to that terrace, because Haley's humiliation was just getting started. Subscribe if you want to see how a woman who thought she was untouchable learned exactly how far she could fall. Hit that notification bell, because the next chapter is going to show you what real consequences look like. The explosion that followed Haley's confession was magnificent in its completeness. I had attended countless social events over the decades, charity galas, business dinners, society weddings, but I had never seen anything quite like the collective gasps, exclamations, and immediate judgment that erupted from 200 wedding guests who had just witnessed a bride admit to betraying her new husband. David stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. His face cycled through emotions, confusion, hurt, anger, and finally something cold and final that I recognized from my own mirror on the day I decided Haley needed to be destroyed. 6 hours, he said, his voice carrying despite its quiet tone. "We've been married for 6 hours, and you're already lying to me." "I'm not lying anymore," Haley said desperately. "I told you the truth. I chose you, David. I'm here with you. You're here because you calculated that I was the better investment," David replied, and I felt a surge of pride at hearing my son finally see clearly. "You kept him as backup in case I didn't work out." Jonathan stepped forward, still holding the folder of evidence. "She never stopped loving me, David. The messages prove it. She was planning to come back to me after she secured her position in your family." "That's not true." Haley's voice cracked with desperation. "I love David. I married David. Why would I marry him if I didn't love him?" The question hung in the air, and I could see people in the crowd exchanging glances. They all knew the answer, even if they were too polite to say it aloud. She married him for his money, his status, his family's position in society. Love had nothing to do with it. Show them the rest, I said to Jonathan, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearest to us. Jonathan looked at me, then back at the crowd. He reached into the folder and pulled out a hotel receipt. The Mandarin Oriental, last month. Presidential suite. 2 nights. She told you she was visiting her sister in Boston, didn't she, David? David's face was stone. Yes. Her sister lives in Portland. She was with me. Jonathan's voice was gaining confidence as he realized the crowd was entirely on his side. We were planning our future. She told me she just needed to get through the wedding to keep her family happy, then she would divorce you, and we could be together. No, Haley whispered, but even she seemed to understand that denial was pointless now. Read the message, someone called out from the crowd. Let's hear what she really said. Jonathan smiled, a cold expression that reminded me why I had chosen him as my weapon. He unfolded a printed text conversation and began to read in the clear, projecting voice of a man who had spent years giving presentations to investors. From Haley, dated 3 weeks ago. I can't wait to be done with this charade. David is so boring, Jonathan. He actually believes I love him. I feel like I'm performing in a play every day. From me. Then why go through with the wedding? From Haley. Because his trust fund is worth $20 million and his mother owns half of downtown. Once I'm legally family, I'll have access to everything. Then we can be together for real. The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. Even I was impressed by the thoroughness of Haley's deception and the casual cruelty of her words. She hadn't just betrayed David. She had mocked him. David turned to look at his bride with an expression I had never seen on his face before. You were performing, he said slowly. Everything. The whole relationship was a performance. David, please. The way you looked at me, the way you said you loved me, the way you talked about our future, all of it was an act. Haley reached for him, but he stepped away from her touch. It wasn't all an act. Some of it was real. My feelings grew and changed and... Stop, David said sharply. Just stop talking. Every word that comes out of your mouth makes this worse. He turned to address the crowd, his voice strong and clear. I want to apologize to all of you for wasting your time tonight. You came here to celebrate what you thought was love, and instead you've witnessed fraud. The marriage you came to witness was based on lies, manipulation, and greed. The murmur from the crowd was supportive now. These people weren't judging David. They were sympathizing with him. He was the victim here, the good man who had been deceived by a calculating woman. The wedding is over, David continued. Please take the gifts you brought. We won't be needing them. The bar will remain open for another hour if you'd like to stay and process what just happened, but I need to leave. I need to think. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back to Haley. Don't come home tonight. Don't come home at all. Whatever belongings you have at my place will be packed and sent wherever you want them. We're done. David, wait. Haley called after him, her voice breaking. You can't just leave me here. This is my wedding too. He turned back one final time, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that I had taught him from childhood. No, Haley. This was your performance. The wedding was just the stage. And with that, my son walked away from his bride of 6 hours, leaving her standing alone in her expensive dress, surrounded by 200 people who now knew exactly who she really was. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, reluctantly. This was the kind of scandal that people would talk about for years, the kind of story that would be retold at dinner parties and social gatherings until it became legend. Phones were still recording, capturing Haley's humiliation for posterity. Jonathan approached her one final time. You made your choice, Haley. You chose security over love, calculation over honesty. How's that working out for you? She looked up at him with mascara streaking down her cheeks, her perfect wedding makeup destroyed by tears and shock. Jonathan, please. You have to understand. I panicked. I was scared. But I do love you. I always loved you. No, he said simply. You loved what we represented. You loved having options. But you never loved either of us enough to be honest. He closed the folder of evidence and tucked it back into his jacket. Goodbye, Haley. I hope the money was worth it. And then he walked away too, leaving Haley standing alone in the center of the terrace, surrounded by the debris of her destroyed reputation. I approached her slowly, savoring this moment I had planned so carefully. She looked up at me with desperate eyes, as if I might be her salvation. Please, she whispered. Please help me fix this. You're his mother. You can talk to him. You can make him understand. I smiled down at her, the same smile I had worn when she questioned my right to attend this wedding. My dear, I said softly, why would I want to fix this? This is exactly what I wanted to happen. The realization dawned in her eyes. You planned this. You brought Jonathan here. I invited a friend to share in our family's celebration. I replied. It's not my fault that friend had such interesting stories to tell. You destroyed my marriage.
No, darling.
You destroyed your marriage the moment you decided to betray my son. I simply made sure everyone could see what you had done. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. You asked me what I was doing here. You told me I wasn't invited. Well, now you know. I was here to watch you fall. And it was even more beautiful than I imagined. Haley's legs finally gave out completely. She sank to the ground in her $1,000 dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. And I walked away, leaving her exactly where she belonged, alone, exposed, and facing the consequences of underestimating Margot Ellison. The story of Haley Danbury's wedding disaster spread through our social circle like wildfire through dry grass. By Sunday morning, less than 24 hours after the ceremony, I was receiving phone calls from friends, acquaintances, and even business associates who had heard various versions of what had happened. The beauty of social media is that it creates permanent records. By the time the sun set on Saturday, videos of Jonathan's revelation were circulating on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The hashtag wedding disaster was trending locally, and someone had created a TikTok compilation of the most shocking wedding moments ever that featured Haley's confession prominently. But the real damage wasn't happening online. The real damage was happening in the circles that mattered, the country club memberships, the charity boards, the business networks that had been Haley's target all along. These people didn't need social media to spread gossip. They had phones, lunch dates, and decades of practice in social destruction. I spent Sunday morning in my garden, tending to my roses while my phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages. I answered selectively, speaking only to those whose opinions carried weight in our community. Margot, dear, I heard what happened at David's wedding. Is he all right? This from Patricia Morrison, who chaired the hospital's fundraising committee and whose opinion influenced charitable giving throughout the city. He's resilient, I replied, carefully pruning a particularly beautiful bloom. Obviously disappointed, but relieved to learn the truth before it was too late to do anything about it. And that girl, Haley? What she did was unconscionable. I prefer not to discuss her, I said, which was the perfect response. It suggested both dignity and judgment, implying that Haley was beneath my consideration while making it clear that I disapproved of her behavior. Similar conversations happened throughout the morning. Each person I spoke with would go on to have their own conversations, spreading the story further while positioning David as the innocent victim and Haley as the calculating villain. By evening, the narrative was set in stone. Meanwhile, David had retreated to his apartment to process what had happened. I gave him space, but I made sure he knew I was available when he was ready to talk. Patience, as I have learned, is often more powerful than immediate action. Haley, according to my sources, was having a very different kind of Sunday. She had spent the night at a hotel, the same one where the wedding guests had been staying, and word was that she had caused quite a scene in the lobby. Hysterical crying, demands to speak to managers, threats of lawsuits that everyone knew she couldn't afford to pursue. By Monday morning, she was calling everyone she could think of who might help her salvage the situation. She called David repeatedly, but he had blocked her number. She called me, but I let those calls go to voicemail. She even called some of the wedding guests, trying to convince them that Jonathan had lied, that the evidence had been fabricated, that she was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. No one believed her. When you've been caught in one massive lie, your credibility for all future statements becomes questionable. The Tuesday morning newspaper carried a small item in the society column, nothing dramatic, just a mention that the Ellison-Danbury wedding had been called off due to unforeseen circumstances. But anyone who read society columns knew that unforeseen circumstances was code for scandal, and the Whisper network filled in the details. Wednesday brought the first real consequence. Haley had been working part-time at a boutique gallery in town, one that catered to the same social circle that had witnessed her humiliation. The owner, a woman named Victoria Sterling who valued her reputation above all else, called to terminate Haley's employment. "I can't have someone with her situation representing my gallery," Victoria told me when she called to ensure I understood that she hadn't been complicit in Haley's deception. It would send the wrong message to my clients. Thursday brought news that Haley's gym membership had been revoked. Apparently, she had caused a scene when other members whispered about her, and the management decided she was disruptive to the environment they were trying to maintain. Friday brought the coup de grace. Haley's parents, who had been so proud to see their daughter marry into a prominent family, issued a statement through their lawyer disowning her behavior and expressing their deep regret for any embarrassment caused to the Ellison family. It was a calculated move designed to distance themselves from the scandal, but it had the effect of isolating Haley completely. By the following Monday, exactly 1 week after the wedding that never was, Haley Danbury had lost her husband, her job, her social standing, her family support, and any hope of rehabilitation in the community where she had planned to build her life. But I wasn't finished with her yet. You see, destroying someone's present is satisfying, but ensuring that their future remains destroyed requires more thorough planning. Haley was young, beautiful, and intelligent. Given time and distance, she might rebuild her life somewhere else, perhaps even find another wealthy man to deceive. I couldn't allow that to happen. The internet, as I mentioned, had already created a permanent record of her humiliation. But the internet is vast, and memories are short. I needed to ensure that anyone who ever searched for Haley Danbury would find the truth about who she really was. I hired a digital marketing firm, the same one that handled online reputation management for my real estate business, to ensure that the videos, articles, and discussions about Haley's wedding disaster would remain prominently featured in search results for years to come. It was a modest investment that would yield returns indefinitely. I also had my lawyer send letters to several gossip websites and society blogs, providing them with verified information about the wedding scandal. Not tabloids, I have too much class for that kind of vulgarity, but the type of high-end publications that wealthy people actually read. Within 2 weeks, Haley Danbury had become a cautionary tale whispered in country clubs and charity luncheons across 3 states. She was the woman who had tried to marry money by deceiving a good man, who had been exposed by her own words, who had lost everything because she couldn't resist the temptation to humiliate the wrong person. David, meanwhile, was recovering beautifully. The sympathy he received from our social circle was overwhelming. Invitations poured in from families who wanted to include the poor young man who had been so terribly betrayed in their gatherings. Several friends offered to introduce him to their daughters, nieces, and granddaughters. "I'm not ready for that yet," he told me when we had dinner together 2 weeks after the wedding. "I need time to trust my own judgment again." "That's very wise," I replied. "But don't let one calculating woman make you suspicious of all women. There are good people in this world who value honesty and integrity above material gain." "Like you, Mom." "Exactly like me." We smiled at each other across the table, and I felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done. My son was free, my family's reputation was intact, and the woman who had dared to disrespect me was facing consequences that would follow her forever. But the best part, the absolutely delicious part, was still to come. 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, Haley made her first and last attempt at extortion. She appeared in my office on a Thursday afternoon, bypassing my assistant by claiming to have an appointment that didn't exist. When she walked into my private office, I was reviewing contracts for a waterfront development project, the kind of lucrative deal that had built my fortune and would continue to sustain it long after people forgot Haley Danbury's name. I looked up from my documents to find her standing in front of my desk, and I had to admire her audacity. She had lost weight since the wedding, and her expensive clothes couldn't quite hide the fact that she was operating on limited resources. But she had dressed carefully for this encounter. A conservative black suit, minimal jewelry, an attempt to project professionalism and respectability. "Margot," she said, as if we were old friends meeting for lunch. "Miss Danbury," I replied, deliberately using her maiden name. What an unexpected surprise. "We need to talk." "I can't imagine what about." I set down my pen but didn't invite her to sit. "I believe everything that needed to be said was said at your wedding reception." She ignored the barb and took the seat across from my desk anyway. "I know you orchestrated everything that happened. Jonathan didn't just appear at my wedding by coincidence." "Jonathan Blackwood is a friend," I said calmly. "He was concerned about my son's welfare. You manipulated him. You fed him information and convinced him to confront me publicly." I leaned back in my chair, studying her with the same attention I gave to potential real estate investments. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what would you propose to do about it?" This was the moment she had been building toward, the reason for her calculated appearance and careful clothing choices. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, which she placed on my desk. "I've been documenting everything," she said. "Your meetings with Jonathan, the private investigator you hired, the digital campaign to destroy my reputation. I have evidence of a coordinated conspiracy to destroy my marriage and my life." I glanced at the tablet without touching it. "How enterprising of you. I want compensation for the damage you've caused. Financial compensation. And I want you to help me rebuild my reputation. Or I go to the press with proof that the wealthy Margot Ellison orchestrated the public humiliation of her son's bride out of petty jealousy." I smiled. I couldn't help myself. The situation was so perfectly, hilariously wrong-headed that laughter was the only appropriate response. "Miss Danbury," I said, "let me explain something to you about leverage. Leverage only works when you have something the other party values more than the cost of giving you what you want." I stood and walked to the window that overlooked downtown, my hands clasped behind my back. "You seem to believe that I would be embarrassed or damaged if people knew I had orchestrated your downfall. But you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of my position in this community." I turned back to face her. "I am Margot Ellison. I have been a pillar of this society for 30 years. I have donated millions to charity, served on countless boards, and built a reputation based on integrity, intelligence, and results. The idea that I would conspire against a woman who betrayed my son would make me more admired, not less." The confidence was draining from her face, but she pressed on. People don't like manipulation. They don't like wealthy women who use their power to destroy others. You're absolutely right, I agreed. They don't like manipulation, which is why they were so appalled by your behavior at the wedding. You manipulated two good men simultaneously, lied to everyone who cared about you, and planned to commit fraud by marrying my son under false pretenses. I walked back to my desk and picked up her tablet, examining it briefly before setting it aside. This documentation you've gathered, meetings between two adults, hiring a private investigator to verify information, ensuring that truthful stories receive appropriate attention, none of it is illegal, unethical, or even unusual. It's exactly what any protective mother would do when she suspected her son was being deceived. But the humiliation. The humiliation was entirely your own creation, I interrupted. I didn't write those text messages to Jonathan. I didn't plan your elaborate deception. I didn't force you to lie to my son for months. All I did was ensure that the truth came to light at the most appropriate moment. I sat back down and regarded her with the patience I might show a slow student. Let me explain your actual situation, Miss Danbury. You have no job, no social standing, no family support, and no prospects. Your reputation is destroyed, your credibility is non-existent, and your name is permanently associated with deception and greed. Her hands were shaking now as the reality of her position became clear. If you somehow managed to convince a tabloid to publish your accusations against me, and that's a significant, if given your proven history of dishonesty, the result would be a legal battle you cannot afford against an opponent with unlimited resources and unimpeachable reputation. I leaned forward slightly. More importantly, it would mean reopening the story of your betrayal, ensuring that it receives fresh attention and new audiences. Is that really the outcome you want? She stared at me in silence, finally understanding that she had brought a pocket knife to a nuclear war. Here's what's actually going to happen, I continued. You're going to leave my office, and you're never going to contact me, my son, or anyone in our family again. You're going to take whatever money you have saved and relocate to a different city, preferably a different state, where you can attempt to rebuild your life under reduced circumstances. I stood again, signaling that our meeting was over. And if you're very fortunate, if you conduct yourself with humility and honesty for the next several years, you might eventually find someone willing to overlook your past mistakes and give you a second chance. She grabbed the tablet from my desk, her movements sharp with desperation and anger. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll find a way to make you pay for this. Miss Danbury, I said, walking to the door and opening it for her. I have already won. Your presence here, begging for mercy and threatening revenge you can't deliver, is simply the victory lap. She walked past me into the hallway, then turned back one final time. You're a monster.
No, irreplea.
I'm a mother who protected her son from a predator. The fact that you can't see the difference tells me everything I need to know about your character. I closed the door on her face and returned to my desk, where the contracts for my waterfront development were waiting. Within 5 minutes, I was back to work, building my empire while Haley Danbury faced the reality of her destroyed life. She left town 2 days later. I know this because I had asked my assistant to keep me informed of her movements until she was no longer a concern. She drove south in her leased BMW, a car she would have to return within the month when she could no longer afford the payments, with everything she owned packed into the back seat. I never saw her again, but her story wasn't over yet. 6 months after Haley fled our city with her tail between her legs, I received an unexpected phone call from Jonathan Blackwood. Margot, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and disbelief. You need to hear this. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports from my property management company, but Jonathan's tone suggested this was worth my attention. What is it? Haley contacted me yesterday. She's in Atlanta now, apparently working as a hostess at some chain restaurant. She wanted to meet me, claimed she had something important to tell me. How fascinating. And did you meet with her?
I did.
Curiosity got the better of me.
He paused.
She's different. Thinner, obviously struggling financially, but there's something else. She's desperate in a way that goes beyond money. I set aside my reports. Desperate how? She begged me to help her get back on her feet. Said she'd learned her lesson, that she understood now what really mattered. She offered to come back to me, to be the woman I deserved, if I would just give her another chance and help her rebuild her life. And what did you tell her? Jonathan's laugh was cold. I told her that ship had sailed, that I wouldn't take her back if she was the last woman on earth, that she had shown me who she really was, and I believed her. Good for you. But here's the interesting part. She's not just broke, Margot. She's in debt. Apparently, she's been trying to maintain her lifestyle on credit cards and personal loans, thinking she could find another wealthy man to rescue her. It hasn't worked out well. This news filled me with a satisfaction that was almost physical in its intensity. How unfortunate for her. There's more. She asked me to loan her money, a significant amount. When I refused, she threatened to go to the press with some story about how we conspired to destroy her reputation. Sound familiar? Very familiar. What did you tell her? I told her the same thing you probably did, that she was welcome to try, but that the only person who would be damaged by reopening that story would be herself. Then I suggested she find a therapist and maybe a financial advisor. Wise counsel. She didn't take it well. Started screaming at me in the restaurant, calling me names, making a scene. Security had to escort her out. After Jonathan and I ended our call, I spent the rest of the evening reflecting on the trajectory of Haley's life since her wedding day. The pattern was predictable: denial, then anger, then bargaining, then desperation. But what she couldn't seem to grasp was that there was no path back to the life she had lost. Over the following months, I received occasional updates on her situation through the network of connections that exist between people of means. Haley had tried to infiltrate Atlanta's social scene, but the story of her wedding disaster had followed her. Someone at a charity luncheon recognized her name and shared the details with their friends. Within weeks, she was persona non grata among the very people she needed to meet. She had attempted online dating, specifically targeting older, wealthy men who might be willing to overlook her past in exchange for her youth and beauty. But the internet is forever, and her name was permanently associated with betrayal and gold digging. Even men desperate enough to ignore her reputation were put off by her obvious desperation. The restaurant job lasted 3 months before she was fired for arguing with customers and calling in sick too frequently. She found work at a clothing store in a shopping mall, then lost that job for similar reasons. Her pattern was becoming clear. She couldn't accept her reduced circumstances, couldn't adapt to honest work, and couldn't stop believing that she deserved better than what her own choices had earned her. A year after the wedding, I learned that she was working as a bartender at a hotel near the airport, the kind of place that catered to business travelers who were more interested in alcohol than conversation. It was honest work, but it was also a far cry from the life she had envisioned for herself as David's wife. But the most delicious piece of information came from an unexpected source: her own family. Her mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice tight with embarrassment and desperation. "Mrs. Ellison, this is Margaret Danbury, Haley's mother. I know this is presumptuous of me to call, but I need to ask for your help." I had met Margaret twice, once when David first introduced Haley to our family, and again at the engagement party I had hosted. She was a pleasant enough woman, middle class and hardworking, who had clearly been proud of her daughter's apparent success in landing a wealthy husband. "Mrs. Danbury," I said carefully, "what can I do for you?" "It's about Haley. I know what she did was wrong. I know she hurt your son terribly, but she's still my daughter. And she's not well." "I'm sorry to hear that. She's been calling us constantly, asking for money, blaming us for not supporting her after the wedding. She says it's our fault that she's struggling because we didn't stand by her when she needed us most. I could hear Margaret's exhaustion through the phone. She's demanded that we take out a second mortgage on our house to loan her money for a new start. When we refused, she threatened to tell everyone that we abandoned her, that we're terrible parents who don't care about their daughter. That must be very difficult for you. Mrs. Ellison, I need to ask, is there any possibility that your son might consider? I don't know, some kind of reconciliation? I'm not asking for him to take her back, but maybe if he could just talk to her, help her understand that she needs to move forward instead of dwelling on the past. The desperation in her voice was palpable, and I felt a moment of sympathy for this woman whose daughter's choices had destroyed not just her own life, but caused collateral damage to everyone who loved her. Mrs. Danbury, I said gently, I understand your position as a mother, but I think you know that what you're asking is impossible. Haley made choices that hurt my son deeply. He has moved on with his life, and asking him to revisit that trauma would be unfair to him. I know. I just thought, maybe there was some way. The kindest thing you can do for Haley is to encourage her to seek professional help, both psychological and financial counseling. She needs to learn to accept responsibility for her choices and build a new life based on realistic expectations. We've tried. She won't listen. She's convinced that if she could just get one more chance with David or with that other man, Jonathan, everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. And there it was, the core delusion that was keeping Haley trapped in her spiral of failure and desperation. She still believed that her happiness depended on external rescue rather than internal change. She still thought she could manipulate her way back to the life she had lost. Mrs. Danbury, I'm going to give you some advice that might sound harsh, but it comes from a place of genuine concern. Stop enabling her. Stop giving her money. Stop listening to her threats. Stop trying to fix her problems for her. Until she faces real consequences, until she has no choice but to rebuild her life from scratch, she will continue to believe that someone else is responsible for her salvation. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought she might have hung up. Finally, you're right. I know you're right. It's just so hard to watch your child destroy themselves. I understand completely. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone hit bottom so they can begin the climb back up. After we ended the call, I sat in my office feeling the deep satisfaction of a lesson fully taught. Haley's downfall was complete not because I had destroyed her, but because she had never learned to build anything real or lasting in her life. She had relied entirely on manipulation, deception, and the exploitation of others' emotions. When that foundation crumbled, she had nothing left to stand on. I want to pause here to speak directly to anyone listening who has ever felt powerless in the face of someone else's manipulation. What you're witnessing in Haley's story isn't just the consequences of betrayal. It's what happens when someone builds their entire life on lies and exploitation. The truth is, people who operate the way Haley did rarely change until they're forced to confront the reality of their choices. They don't learn from gentle corrections or second chances. They learn from consequences that are so unavoidable, so complete, that denial becomes impossible. This is exactly what we explore in our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. It's not just about healing from what others have done to you. It's about recognizing manipulation when you see it, protecting yourself from people who would exploit your kindness, and understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to face the natural consequences of their actions. If you've been manipulated, betrayed, or taken advantage of, this book will show you how to rebuild not just your life, but your ability to recognize and deflect people who would harm you. The strategies we share aren't about revenge. They're about empowerment, boundaries, and never again allowing anyone to treat you as less than you deserve. You can find the link in the description below. Don't wait for someone else to validate your worth. Start reclaiming your power today. But right now, let's return to Haley's story, because her final chapter was still being written. And trust me, it was even more satisfying than what came before. 2 years after the wedding that destroyed her life, Haley Danbury made one final, desperate attempt to reclaim her past. She appeared at my front door on a rainy Thursday evening in November, looking like a shadow of the woman who had once believed she could humiliate me with impunity. I was in my living room, reading beside the fireplace with a glass of wine, when my housekeeper informed me that someone was at the door claiming to be family. I knew immediately who it was. Only Haley would be audacious enough to claim such a connection after everything that had happened. When I opened the door, I had to suppress a sharp intake of breath. The woman standing on my doorstep bore little resemblance to the confident bride who had questioned my right to attend her wedding. She had lost significant weight, her blonde hair was dull and poorly maintained, and her clothes, while clean, were obviously inexpensive and ill-fitting. "Hello, Margot," she said, her voice hoarse from crying or shouting or both. "Miss Danbury." I made no move to invite her inside. "What are you doing here? I need to talk to you."
Please.
"Just 5 minutes." I considered sending her away immediately, but curiosity won. I wanted to hear what possible argument she could make, what final card she thought she had to play. She offered a pathetic apology, claiming she had changed, begging for work, for a second chance. But I saw through her performance immediately. This wasn't genuine remorse, it was desperation disguised as contrition. "Miss Danbury," I said, walking to the door and opening it, "let me explain your situation one final time. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are not a good person who made bad choices. You are a predator who finally encountered someone more dangerous than yourself." She paused in the doorway, and for a moment I thought she might finally accept defeat. Instead, her desperation transformed into anger, the same ugly rage I had seen glimpses of during her wedding disaster. "You think you're so perfect," she snarled, her mask finally slipping completely. "You think you're better than everyone else because you have money. But you're just a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy." "There it is," I said calmly. "The real Haley Danbury. Not the apologetic victim, not the reformed woman seeking redemption, but the entitled, vicious creature who believes the world owes her something." She turned and walked away into the rain, her shoulders hunched with defeat. I watched until she disappeared into the darkness, then closed the door and returned to my fireplace, my wine, and my book. I never saw Haley Danbury again. Today marks 3 years since the wedding that never was, and I find myself in my garden again, tending to my roses as the morning sun filters through the oak trees that have stood on this property longer than I have been alive. David is getting married again in 2 months to Sarah, a woman who is everything Haley pretended to be. Real where Haley had been false, genuine where Haley had been calculating, secure in herself where Haley had been desperately grasping for status and wealth. This morning, I received a call from Jonathan Blackwood with news that Haley is remarrying to a truck driver in South Carolina, having created an entirely fictional past for herself as a tragic widow. Still lying even now. As I reflect on everything that happened, I feel nothing but satisfaction at the choices I made. Some people might call what I did cruel or excessive, but those people have never had to watch someone they love being systematically deceived and manipulated. The roses in my garden will bloom for another month before the first frost claims them, but their roots run deep, and they will return next spring stronger and more beautiful than ever. Like my family, like my legacy, like the lessons I have taught about the cost of crossing Margot Ellison. I am 65 now, and I have learned that revenge is not about anger, it's about balance. It's about ensuring that actions have consequences, that respect is maintained, that the natural order of things is preserved. I am Margot Ellison. I am a mother, a businesswoman, a survivor, and a force of nature. And I am exactly where I belong, secure in the knowledge that respect, once properly earned, lasts forever. Some stories end with forgiveness. Some end with redemption. This story ends with justice served and a lesson learned. If you come for the queen, you'd better not miss. Because I never do.